Welcome to Catastrophes. This is a podcast about disasters, why they happen, the underlying reasons, and some of their effects and implications. Today, we are discussing the Central Texas floods, and we're going to look at the factors that really made the flash floods so devastating, looking at the natural terrain, the geography, but then the early warning systems and how that unfolded itself. And then we will look at the response and make quick reference to the second set of flash floods that is currently impending or may occur on Sunday, July 13th. And with that, the intention of today's episode is not to demean or diminish the experiences of people who are facing these traumatic floods, but rather explore, question, critique, and ask why these flash floods were so deadly and why they happened the way they did. And with that, let's begin. Welcome. Today is Sunday, July 13th, and I am recording on basically all the information I've been able to provide on the Central Texas floods. And before I began recording today, I actually had to stop, and there was new reports from 10:17 a.m. Mountain Standard Time where the search and rescue squads have had to be suspended or stopped because there are more potential flash floods. And the communities, local governments are worried that another 3 to 6 inches of rain may fall in the area that have already been devastated. So we will discuss what I know, what I've been able to find on the second last part of this, of today's episode. But really, I wanted to start off with a overview of the situation, of what unfolded, how it unfolded, looking at the overall background, and then we're going to go into the geography of Central Texas and why the Guadalupe River has flash floods and is named one of the deadliest places in America for flash floods. And then we're going to look at the early warning systems, which have had quite a bit of discussion around them online, I've seen. And finally, we will follow it up with the response from multiple search and rescue organizations and how that has gone, and then kind of the response of what's going on today, Sunday, July 13th. So with that, I really wanted to start kind of an overview, a background of how the Central Texas floods started. So to go back to the beginning, July 2nd, Wednesday, we actually have to look at the Texas Division of Emergency Management, where they announced the potential for flash floods, particularly for their holiday weekend, which was Independence Day, July 4th. In West and Central Texas, we note that there was the potential for floods. And they urged their residents to follow instructions from local officials, make an emergency plan, and prepare an emergency supply kit. And if you're wanting to see kind of the timeline I've created, I've posted a bunch of articles that you'll be able to find attached to the link for this episode. That's July 2nd, Wednesday. On July 3rd, we note that the National Weather Service, which has its own discussion, they issue a short-term guidance where there will be thunderstorms and really humid temperatures, really the conditions to produce great rainfall. And the National Weather Service also releases a potential flood outlook, noting that the flash flood or river flooding is possible in Central Texas in the Guadalupe River. But again, they don't necessarily say that it's going to be this great, massive flood that would come effectively. And on July 3rd, we note that the National Weather Service indicates that there will be significant amount of rainfall overnight, from anywhere from 5 to 7 inches of rainfall. And particularly they talk about Kerrville, which is the area that experienced significant flooding. And that was at about 1:20 in the afternoon Central Time. So they forecasted 5 to 7 inches of rainfall. At 6:30 p.m. the night before the rivers, the National Weather Service issued an updated forecast for the Guadalupe River, where rapid runoff is expected with locally considerable flash and urban flash floodings possible. The nocturnal timing will also enhance the hazard's potential and its impact. And it notes the possibility of a really large flash flood. However, a little bit of nuance to all this situation, and when you really dive into the material and what people say online and just kind of discussing with them, this area in central Texas experiences flash floods often. It is called Flash Flood Alley, and many of these messages that are sent out to people, sometimes they are just a regular part of the year. So we're going to have this discussion on early warning systems and warnings themselves, and the amount of people that are actually a part of, the large scale emergency location systems. But really, it's important to note the context that many people, they hear a lot of these messages that, there's potential for these flash floods to occur. And then sometimes they just aren't as bad as people expect. So all of that is leading up to 6:30 p.m. On Thursday, July 3rd. As we go into the nighttime at midnight, potentially at 1:14 to midnight, we see flash flood warning be upgraded from a watch to flash flood warning. And that's in parts of Kerr County. So when we look at the entirety of the Guadalupe River, if you just Google it, you pull it up, you'll actually see the Guadalupe River extends from, west to east. And in the far west part, where Kerrville and Kerr County are, that is on the western part of the Guadalupe River. That's the part that floods first. And if you have been following, the Camp Mystic, where a number of children were located and camping, they were in the far western part of the Guadalupe River and western part of Kerr County. And unfortunately, at about 2:30 a.m., we note that the rain has already started, but it's beginning to become heavier. And there's sources indicating around midnight to 12:30, we see very heavy rain, more heavy than normal. Now, at about 3 a.m., we note people have experienced significant floods. There are flash floods where the river, the Guadalupe, has overfilled and it's starting to sweep inside buildings. Particularly, we talk about the Camp Mystic cabin. This is where the first indications of floodwaters starting to get into buildings. And it should be noted, the risk of flash floods is so great. Just 6 inches of moving water can knock a 5'11" person down. A full foot of water has the force to move a full car. And we see both of these elements become extremely apparent within this flash flood event. Anyways, as 3 a.m. rolls around, it is, in the middle of the night, and people are kind of awoken by the rush of water and the movement of water outside of their buildings, until, for cabins specifically, we note that the area in western Guadalupe River is filled with campsites. People are camping, and it being a holiday, there are many campers out. So this is where we hear the first instances of homes, buildings, trailers being flooded. And it isn't until 3:30 where we hear first responders start to get swept away by flash floods themselves. And this is, again, people who are certified to be flash flood, swift water qualified, be able to actually go through the floodwaters themselves. For them to get swept away is quite interesting. And this timeline comes from CNN. They were able to verify their sources. There's even a report from Kerrville County Manager Dalton Rice who says this. So really interesting that at 3:30 a.m. we actually see first responders start to get swept away, kind of indicating that these flash floods themselves are worse than the typical one that people may be used to experiencing. And again, a discussion we'll take on in the emergency warning systems part. It isn't until 4 a.m., 4:03 a.m. particularly, that the National Weather System issues a flash flood emergency warning for Kerr County, stating, "Move to higher ground now. This is an extremely dangerous and life-threatening situation." At around 4:30, 4:45, we see floodwaters significantly rise. There's reports suggesting that 22 feet of water has risen around the Guadalupe River, so it has filled and then overspilt and very wide. So between 3:45 a.m. and 4:45 a.m., we know that's where we see 22 feet of water basically come. And there's a gauge that really measures this, and it's from the National Oceanic Atlantic Association. They have a water protection gauge, which basically they were able to pull information from. After 4:45 a.m. though, they note that the gauge is offline, and I wasn't able to find out why. But over the course of 1 hour, 3:45 to 4:45, we see a significant amount of water rise in this gauge, whether that's the deluge of water that is kind of come from upstream down, and it's where that reporting system, that gauge is, or it's the sheer amount of rainfall falling. I think it's more to do with the rainfall itself. There's multiple reports suggesting that, from midnight to 4:45 a.m., there's a significant amount of rainfall, historic amount. And then 5 a.m. and onwards, we see the riverbanks burst, where people are overtaken by the floodwaters and they're trying to leave themselves. But again, trying to drive through rapid waters is sometimes a difficult thing. Your vehicles just don't have the power. And if it's up to a foot and the river waters, the flash flood waters themselves are rushing, they have the potential to carry your vehicle away. The other interesting notes is at 5:30 a.m., Kendall County indicate the first wireless emergency message for flash flooding, and that was sent to residents. 3 more alerts were issued on wireless warning systems between 7 a.m. and 8:06 a.m. their time. And this is where we really see the additional flooding occur around the Guadalupe River and affecting a number of different cities. And from 8:30 a.m. to even today, search and rescue people have been searching for people. Some climbed up trees, others are on tops of buildings, and others stuck in their vehicles. And this is really where we see search and rescue take over, and the river waters themselves rush down. So overall, as of July 13th, 2025, 129 people have lost their lives in the flash floods themselves, and 170 people are still missing 1 week after the incident. And reports vary depending on where you look about the amount of people who have been rescued. On Monday, few days after, I saw the number was at 229 people rescued. So again, there's a number of different sources, and I think we really have to wait, another week or so until the search and rescue can be completed, where we really get an indication of how many people were saved by search and rescue and the good work that they've done. So overall, this is a significant disaster, and it happened so rapidly. So the first discussion I really want to have around the Central Texas floods is the use of early warning systems. And in the timeline, I indicated the day before, there is a number of basically flash flood warnings, potential flash flood warnings. this is quite the nuanced conversation, and I think it's right to indicate kind of what's the truth on the ground, but then also what do we need to do better within the early warning system kind of overall. So, 12 hours before the forecasted rainfall comes, we note that there's going to be the potential for flash floods and so on. However, when you go through the testimony of the survivors and the victims, really these messages about flash floods come so often that they may lose their meaning. And for some in Central Texas, many of which have actually opted out of some of the warning text messages and such. And there's a survey, I think it was completed early 2025, and I wasn't able to find the who created it, but I thought it was really interesting. And so it's a survey around the amount of people who have opted out of emergency text messages or emergency messages. And in Texas alone, the opt-out rate is 25 to 30%, which is almost quadruple the national average. So again, when we think about the flash floods themselves, if you are often inundated with messages about there's going to be a flash flood, you may not take that warning as seriously. And when you're hearing it all the time, as people were, then you might think this is just another one until, it's a really bad event. And some nuance to it is when you're just inundated with all these messages, how often are you going to listen to them? And then I think there's the separate message or the secondary element to it for all of these people who are camping and you're wanting to be maybe disconnected from technology, or you might not have access to your phones. You may just not want to listen to any sort of those events unless they are immediately happening to you. And I think the other element to all of this is at 4:03 a.m., 1 hour, 2 hours after these floods are starting to occur, that's when we really see these warning systems go out. So a bit of a difficult conversation because I understand a lot of what the testimonies of, well, there needs to be better early warning systems, especially with flash floods. And that is true. We can always improve. But at the same time, there is also these systems in place and they do work. In fact, early warning systems are what can save a lot of people. And in the Central Texas floods, I think it has to be acknowledged, there are people who evacuated or were able to get uphill because they got those messages. However, there are also those that didn't get the messages and were affected. So again, these systems are already in place. We just need to sometimes improve them. But then also, how do we make sure that, there's not this, long-term, not complacency, but that people are listening to the messages that we send them and that they're not opting out as well. And I think the larger discussion is government trust, and especially in some of the U.S. states where government trust is at an all-time low, and there's a lot of kind of Democratic Freedom House information to back that up, where people don't really want to listen to the messages from particular state, local, and federal governments, or FEMA, for instance. So I think all that has to be considered when we think and we have this discussion about early warning systems. They work, but we always need to be improving them, and we always need to understand the local context of them. It is simply not right to say that, well, the early warning systems went out and people just didn't listen. And again, an important consideration, and one where I'll stop there. And for the next piece that I want to cover, it is the natural geography of the Guadalupe River. So there are two really interesting reports that I found, and I'm going to kind of pull from those reports. Again, I have linked them to this particular episode. So the first point is the soil around the Guadalupe River is particularly light in a non-sciencey way, if I could explain it like that. And what it does is, because the soils are this way and it's been so dry over the last 15, 20 years, they just do not absorb water as they should, or as soils do in other parts of the country. And this is just part of their natural geography. And the difficulty of when soil and when there's excessive heat and nothing is absorbed in the soils, just the ground, that's where we see water spill into the river or rush down the sides of hills into rivers. And this is one of the difficulties of this event, is when there is so much rainfall. Well, not only do our systems, our sewer systems, our culverts, our dams, our rivers, not only do they fill quickly, but when you have this additional factor of drier conditions and soils just don't typically absorb water as they normally do, that's when you see flash floods become so extreme and occur so rapidly as they did in the Guadalupe River. And I thought that was really interesting. There's a few places you can look for that kind of information, just like if you want more information on that. That's kind of as far as the science of soils will go. That's all, I'll take it there. But I want to cover a report that was created by the University of Texas, and they actually covered the 1998 and 2002 floods in central Texas, the Guadalupe River. And actually their first opening line for the Guadalupe River is, it is one of the 3 most dangerous regions in the USA for flash floods. Not only did a flash flood occur in 1998, 1987, 2002, but also we've had two other ones within the last 15 years, including this one. This region is prone to flooding. And part of it is, yes, the natural geography as well. In 2002, based on this University of Texas report, the dam, quote unquote, failed, according to local residents. However, there's a report by the Army Corps of Engineers who was actually quite pleased with how the dam worked, because the dam was able to maintain its basically capacity, the amount of water it held, and it was able to use an emergency spillway, which allows for additional water to kind of run off in a particular way to make sure that the dam, didn't break or overfill and then cause even more damage. And the Army Corps of Engineers was able to basically maintain the capacity of this dam. And again, there I think are several dams along the Guadalupe River, and their functionality or how they operated will be interesting to see and note during the Central Texas floods and how it worked. So that's kind of the geography. Really, the big takeaway is going to be the soil conditions, and then just the dryness over the last years has really created the conditions for the Guadalupe River Basin to be so extreme in terms of rapid flash floods. The next component I really want to touch on is the search and rescue efforts, which have been ongoing for a week and a few days now. Difficulty of search and rescue for Kerr County and Kerrville itself, because it's something that kind of goes under discussed. Like how big of an area do the search and rescue experts have and take on? And so I was able to find a whole bunch of information related to kind of that and that challenge itself. With Kerr County, it is a huge area. And from Monday to this past Friday, search and rescue operatives have already covered 100 kilometers along sides and near the Guadalupe River. First of all, that is remarkable. The sheer amount of people and force needed to do that is very impressive. And so search and rescue operatives tend to be very specialized in the way of they are working with a group, they know what they're looking for, and then they have technical training to do it. And I found a quote I thought was interesting that I'll read. This is a massive field, 100 kilometers, that is happening again, and this is an unprecedented flood event. So we are still currently in the primary search phase, which is the rapid one. They are running it. So we have different segments which are set out. Each of these segments are taking anywhere between an hour or 3 hours to look up to 2 kilometers. So that means that we're running into a lot of technical challenges with terrain, with water, and potentially even with weather, with these rising fields. And I thought that was an interesting way to put it. So, and something that I'm not privy to, I don't know all about the search and rescue elements of this kind of flash flood. How they are taking a bunch of people and then between an hour and 3 hours, they search 2 kilometers. And a difficult job to do, one, because there's been over 200 people rescued. So clearly they've done really good work so far. And people being rescued in different areas, different places. And regardless, the search and rescue continues on, July 13th. And with a hold on the search and rescue, and with potentially more flash floods, between 3 to 6 inches more rain supposedly coming today and tomorrow, it's fair to wonder what is going to be next. And especially with a region that has seen 5 significant flash flood events over the last 40 years. I guess just kind of going into what is happening today, the National Weather Service has forecasted that the Guadalupe River could rise to 15 feet by Sunday afternoon, and 5 feet above flood stage, which is, just kind of going outside of the river. So a lot of roads and bridges which were flooded are at risk of flooding again and being even more in a state where they require a huge recovery. And with that is all the information I have that I was able to verify. I'll be really interested to follow along with some of the stories the victims tell, and how maybe even improving our weather forecasting systems, which I know has its own discussion around possible cuts, or not possible, but actual cuts to the National Weather System and whatnot. So with that is all I have for today. I'm really excited to bring actually 2 future episodes where we get to discuss with search and rescue people. I interview them about the scale and scope of search and rescue, but we're going to actually look at it from a mountain perspective and looking at our mountain communities. And with that, thank you for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube. Please provide me a like. And if you can, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. I greatly appreciate it. If you want a disaster reviewed or information, you can reach me on any of my social medias, which I'm quite active on. And that is all I got for today.